Hello, friends, and welcome to Escaping the Mouse with your host, me, Breckroll. All right, I'm going to do a little bit of a discussion today about my co-partner here, Flash. There's been a lot of questions about her, about how she came into my life and stuff like that. And one of the most common questions is, how old is Flash? I tried doing this a number of years ago and came up with a number that kind of baffled me, but we're going to do it again today and see if we can figure out how old she is. And we're definitely going to learn a little bit about how she came into my life. So Flash has been a part of my life for a very, very long time. I was thinking this morning exactly when she kind of came into my life, and I couldn't pin it down to a particular year, but I'm guessing it's been somewhere in the neighborhood of about 35 years. Let me tell you the story. At this point, I had graduated from high school, but I was still living at home while I was going to college, and I was working part-time, but the main priority was, to go to college and get that completed. And so I wasn't really making a whole lot of money at the time, and so it made sense just to kind of live home. And at that time, my mom was a teacher, and so she'd go to work before I went to school, because my first class in the morning was usually at 10 a.m. So I got to sleep in a little bit while my mom was going to work. And one morning she was getting into her car to go to work, and all of a sudden she came back in the house and said, "There's a tortoise on the street." And that got my attention. I got up and went out, and Flash was just kind of walking down the street there. I don't know exactly where she came from. I doubt she was wild. She probably was somebody's pet. But we never saw any letters or any, wanted posters or missing tortoise posters. And so she just kind of became part of our life. Now, she's a very low maintenance pet, because you can just basically put her in the backyard, and as long as she can't get out, and as long as there's plenty to eat, she'll be very, very happy. And so she lived in my mom's backyard for the first probably 10 or 15 years that we had her. Eventually I moved into an apartment, but I couldn't take her with me because I didn't have any kind of a yard whatsoever. So she continued to live in the backyard of my parents' house until I got my house. Now, even then, that wasn't the ideal solution, because when I bought my house, I got it brand new, and there was nothing in the backyard. It was just dirt. So it took several years of work in the yard before we got to the point where we thought the Flash could survive in the backyard, where there was something there for her to eat. Now, the truth is, I initially was focusing on the inside of the house over the outside. So, I didn't really do anything in the backyard. It turned out actually some weeds took over in there. And for a while, she probably could have survived on the weeds, but I didn't actually bring her over to my place until I got to the point where there was actually grass on the ground. And at that point, she spent the rest of the time with me, living in the backyard of the house. She had what I called her winter house, which is under the patio cover, where I insisted that she sleep when she hibernated. And then she had a summer house, which was in the yard. As a matter of fact, the summer house is that right there. I brought that with me. So that was kind of Flash's life for probably about 15 years in the house in California. Then the time came for me to move to Texas, and obviously I couldn't take her with me initially, because I didn't know where I was going to end up, if I was going to have an apartment or any of that kind of stuff initially, or whether the apartment would allow me to have a place where she could be kept. So she stayed in California with my parents for a year or so after I moved away, and then about that time my parents decided that they were going to sell their house and move into an apartment, kind of a senior assisted living place. And so when they sold the house, obviously they had to do something with Flash, and Flash ended up going and visiting Beth for a year and a half or so, until I picked her up last year, and now she's here. Now, it's funny, she's gotten out of the yard in California twice, and I think I've told this story. First time, I just left the gate open one day. I wasn't even thinking about it, and I walked away with the gate open, and she just kind of walked out the front gate and started walking down the street. Well, I was out working in the garage at the time, and I heard a car stop in front of the house and say, "Hey, there's a tortoise in the street." And I figured, well, that's got to be Flash. So went out and grabbed her, put her back in the backyard, and everything was fine. Another time she got out, I didn't realize she got out, and I didn't realize she was missing for several days. Turns out she'd walked down to the end of the block, ran into a row of houses, turned right, went down to the end of a cul-de-sac, and started sleeping in somebody's front yard. And like I said, I didn't realize she was missing until I saw the people put in hey, we found a tortoise note out front. And so I contacted them. It turned out they had a tortoise of their own, and so Flash and that tortoise, I guess, just kind of hung out together. They also had a young daughter, probably 5 or 6 years old, who really enjoyed having Flash around, and fed her so many strawberries that when I got her, her face was stained red. See, that was a big part of making the yard Flash proof. That's why, you remember, I put all these bricks along the fence going all the way around the yard, because I wanted to make sure that Flash couldn't get out, because I know she can dig, and I know if she sees any light underneath something, she'll head for that. And obviously I don't want her getting out, so, because there's way too many places here to for her to, if she got out, she could get hurt. There's cars around here. Of course, there were cars around before, but there's places where she could escape where I'd never find her. She could literally return to the wild if she chose to do so, or there are some wild animals around here that could be a risk to her too. So we kind of made the decision to prevent the yard from being escape-proof for Flash, and so far it's been pretty well. Now, one of the biggest questions I get is, how old is she? And we've looked at that. Like I said, at one point I counted the rings on her shells, and I actually did a little bit of reading, and they're a little dubious about how accurate that is for determining the age of a tortoise. It isn't necessarily like that. But they do say that there are some ways to look at the shell and determine. So we're going to try doing that. I've actually shot a couple of photos of different regions of her shell, and we're going to bring it in the house and put it on Photoshop, and we're going to blow it up and see if we can figure it out. Basically, they say, though, with tortoises this size, they grow to a certain size, and then they kind of stop growing. They hit their full size, and that's as big as they get. And they say it takes them usually about 20 years to get to that age. Now, I always kind of had some doubts about the rings on her shell determining that, because if that's the case, then she should be getting bigger. And as far as I can tell, she has not changed in size in the about 35 years that I've had her. So, like I said, we're going to take a close look at the rings and see if we can get some sort of an idea. But I do know that I've had her for about 35 years, and she was probably full size at that point. So that would mean that she's at least 55. We're going to see if we can come up with any better estimates after looking at her shell close up. So let's go in and do that. All right, so this is actually one of the photos I shot of Flash's shell, and you can actually see here some of the different layers of the shell that are in here. Now, one of the things I did a little bit of research on this before I started, and they talked about how there's kind of thicker sections of the rings and thinner sections, and it's supposedly based on the food supply at the time. Apparently the thicker is when she's getting a lot of good food, and the thinner is when the food is maybe a little less. And they say that you usually get 2 cycles of that a year. So you'll have one thick ring and one thin ring with a tortoise that's well fed, because the thick ring supposedly deals with when food was plentiful and there was a lot of growth, and the thin thin ring is when there's not as much food, and that could be described as when she's hibernating, and maybe just not growing as much during that point. Even though looking at this, it can be really difficult to figure out exactly what's going on here. At this point now, I'm kind of zooming into the point where I'm zooming past the resolution of the photo. That's about as much as I can do without the picture really becoming pixelated. But you can see, you can see a very definite line here, and a definite line here, line here, line here, line here, another one. And then it gets kind of thin out here. It's hard to see. But see, that's one of the things they say is that tortoises, when they get to mature age, they stop growing. And so that would make sense then that the rings would become closer together. You can see there's a huge difference between like this ring and this ring. That's a big spurt there. But when you get a little older here, the rings are getting thinner and closer together because she's not growing as much. So it's kind of hard to get anything out of this. Now, I tried doing this a number of years ago with a digital camera I had at the time, and didn't get really, really good results on it because it was kind of a low-resolution camera. Let's look at this image. This is a back section of her shell, which it seemed to me was going to give me maybe some of the best imagery because what she does, she rubs against things, and then that kind of smooths everything off. So one of the things she doesn't generally tend to do is back into things. So it seemed to me that this might be the best place to look in terms of getting, some of the least damaged shell images. This one here, for instance, you look here, this is completely worn smooth. In fact, all you really see there are some of the scratches that have come from her rubbing up against things over the years. It's kind of interesting looking at it this way. Now, they say that when tortoises are young, their shells tend to be a little softer. So that's one of the ways that they can determine the age of a tortoise. But she hasn't been young for a very, very long time, so the shell is nice and rough now. It's hard and it's rough, and it doesn't, if you squeezed her at the time, it could hurt a little bit, and she might not be very happy with that. But now that she's got a bit of a stronger shell here, but I mean, let's try and make a guess here, because this is probably going to give us the best imagery right now of maybe how old she is, because I see a line there, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and then you get some thinner ones out here, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and then you get to a major shell segment there where it changes from where it transfers from one segment to the next. Because see, these are all little pieces that are all connected together, and that's where the growth is going on in these little sections here. But once again, like I said, as she gets older, it becomes harder to tell where the lines are, because at that point, she isn't growing as fast, and so the lines are getting closer together. Kind of interesting looking at it this way. See, this is probably the best one I've got. That's a side section. Let's see, what's this? Okay, that's another side section. See, I looked at one side and then the other. And so that's one of the side sections from one side. That's the side section from the other side. And then I have this one here, which is right on top. And you can see this one's, is really, really worn away because, she's rubbed against things. She's rubbed underneath things when she's gone into places that are maybe a little too tight for her. And just kind of worn this all smooth, and you can just see the little scratches in there. So at this point, I don't know, I may not be able to come up with much of an estimate of how old she is. Now, doing a little bit of research on Flash, I discovered kind of a few interesting things about her. First off, gopher tortoises can survive as long as 45 years, and I'm guessing that that's based on living in the wild where there's predators and maybe not always an abundant source of food. However, in captivity, there's examples of them living 75 or even 100 years. So it's very likely that this girl might outlive me at some point. I have actually thought about it, and at some point I'm going to probably make arrangements to see if the Cameron Park Zoo would be interested in taking custody of her in the event that I'm no longer around. Another option, of course, would be to return her to Beth. Beth is still kind of a little heartbroken that she lost Flash, but you know, we'll cross that bridge at some point when we see what's going on. But it's at this point I'm unable to say exactly how old she is. It could be that she's still older than I am, but I think we can safely say that she's probably at least 45 or 50 years old, because like I said, I've had her you know, for at least 35 years, and during that time she's always been laying eggs, and apparently the female gopher tortoises don't reach maturity until at least 12 to 20 years. So, you know, like I said, she's probably at least that old. So I don't know, there's the answer to your question as much as we can tell. I guess they can do some examination of her skeletal structure, but unfortunately they can only do that after she dies, in order to tell what her actual age is. But I don't know, she's been around for quite a while with me, and hopefully she'll continue to thrive for many years to come. Now, I thought it was interesting when I was reading, I also discovered that they're kind of native to the southeastern United States, and that's kind of interesting because, you know, I lived in California when I got her, and so it was kind of interesting that, you know, I don't know if she was bred in captivity in California, or if somebody found her in the South and brought her to California, and then I brought her back. And apparently she's, gopher tortoises are considered the official state reptile of the state of Georgia and the official tortoise of the state of Florida. So, I don't know. It's interesting that she came back and ended up back here in the South again. It's also interesting the ravenous appetite this little critter has. I brought out 4 slices of celery about 10 minutes ago when I started this video, with the hopes that would kind of keep her in one place so that we could get some good video footage of her. And I went in for a couple minutes while I was showing you those photos, and at that time she completely devoured the celery. So I can honestly say she isn't going without food, and there's plenty back here for her to eat. So anyway, I think that's all that I have for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit more about my friend Flash here. And thank you as always for watching. I'll see you next time on Escaping the Mouse. Good night.